The late morning sun glared over the dry Texas plains as Silas Boone Hawthorne stood at the edge of the corral, watching his horse with a heaviness in his chest. The animal, Iron Smoke, a proud, muscled bay stallion, was no longer the graceful beast he once was. His left front leg was grotesquely swollen, the tumor bulging beneath the skin like it might tear open at any moment. Silas's hand tightened around his worn hat, his eyes fixed on the creature that had been with him through droughts, deaths, and days darker than night. Around him, a few neighboring ranchers kept quiet, watching with respectful silence. Iron Smoke wasn't just a horse. He was part of Boone's soul, the last of a bloodline passed down from his father, who had bred working horses before the banks came for the land. Boone had raised this stallion from a colt, through good years and lean ones, even after losing Delilah, his wife of 32 years. She had passed without warning, leaving only old photographs, half-empty coffee cups, and a grief Boone never spoke of. Now, Iron Smoke was all he had left that still breathed and remembered. The vet, Doc Vern Holloway, had warned him weeks ago. The tumor was aggressive. Surgery would be expensive, risky, and likely futile. Boone had held off, hoping for a miracle or maybe just too stubborn to let go. But last night, with the old whiskey bottle open and tears he'd never admit to choking his throat, Boone had made the choice. He'd take Iron Smoke to the auction in Amarillo, not to sell him, but to see if there was anyone out there crazy enough to try to save him. A long shot. One last chance. The auction yard was hotter than the devil's breath. Boone walked Iron Smoke through the gate, boots kicking up dust, the horse limping slightly but still proud. Whispers followed them. Folks knew Boone, knew his pride. And they knew a man like him didn't bring his favorite animal to auction without a reason that tore him up inside. The crowd went quiet as he led the horse into the center pen. That's when it happened. Iron Smoke bumped his leg hard against the gate. The tumor split open with a wet, sickening noise. Blood and thick fluid spilled out, and then something dropped. Solid, heavy, not normal. The people gasped. Some stepped back. Others leaned in. Boone stood frozen, staring at the dark red soil as whatever had fallen glistened under the sun. And in that moment, Boone knew this wasn't just a tumor. Something had been hidden inside his horse and his past this entire time. The object that dropped from Iron Smoke's leg wasn't something anyone expected to see. It wasn't tissue or bone or any kind of infection. It was round, about the size of a large marble, and coated in dark blood. As the liquid slid away, it revealed a strange metallic gleam beneath. Boone stared, not breathing. The murmurs around him grew louder. Doc Vern Holloway pushed through the small crowd, his face pale and his voice low. "That's not from nature," he muttered, kneeling beside the object. Doc picked it up with a cloth, careful not to touch it with his bare hands. The crowd pressed in closer. It was metal, smooth on one side, almost like it had been manufactured, and rough on the other, like it had broken off something. Boone knelt slowly beside him, his knees stiff and aching. "What the hell is that?" he whispered. Doc didn't answer right away. He kept turning it in the cloth, eyes scanning every surface. "It looks old. Like it's been in there for years," he said finally. Boone looked at Iron Smoke, who now stood calmer than he had in weeks. The horse didn't seem to be in pain anymore. In fact, he was still, peaceful even, as if the pressure had been lifted, like whatever had been festering inside him had finally been released. The bleeding slowed. Boone ran his hand gently down the horse's neck, whispering, "You've been carrying this all this time?" The auctioneer, a wiry man named Clem Duggar, stepped forward nervously. "Boone, what is that thing? Some kind of bullet?" The question triggered something deep in Boone's memory. A sound. A scream. The echo of a distant gunshot from years ago. But no, he shook his head. That wasn't it. The memory wasn't complete, just fragments swirling around whatever that object truly was. Something about it felt personal, familiar even, though he couldn't place it. Doc placed the object in a small wooden box and handed it to Boone. "You need to take this home. And maybe you should talk to someone about it, your family, maybe." The mention of family cut like a knife. Boone hadn't spoken to Jolene, his daughter, in over 3 years. Their last conversation had ended with slammed doors and words they couldn't take back. She wouldn't come running just because a horse coughed up a mystery. Or would she? As Boone led iron smoke out of the pen, the sun dipped slightly lower, casting long shadows behind them. The box in his hand felt heavier than it should have. He didn't know what he was holding, but something told him it wasn't just metal. It was a key. To what, he couldn't yet say. But whatever had been buried in his horse's flesh might also be buried deep in Boone's past. That night, Boone sat alone in his dimly lit kitchen, the wooden box on the table before him. The cicadas buzzed outside, their constant hum pressing in through the screen door. The object, still wrapped in Doc Holloway's cloth, rested like a stone at the center of his world. The old radio on the counter played a soft country tune, but Boone wasn't listening. He was staring into something deeper than the wood grain of the table. He was staring into memory. He unwrapped the object again. It gleamed faintly under the hanging bulb, smooth on one side, jagged on the other. It didn't make sense. Iron smoke had never been injured badly enough for something like this to be lodged inside him, unless it had happened long ago. But Boone had owned him since he was a foal. Still, something about the metal felt familiar. Not the shape, no, it was the feeling. The weight. Like something Boone had once carried, or maybe lost. He opened the drawer next to him and pulled out an old cigar box full of photographs. There were images of Delilah, smiling with a baby Jolene on her hip, of the ranch when it was full of cattle and life, of Boone himself, younger, prouder, standing with a man he hadn't thought of in years, Asa Rawlins. That name hit like a fist to the chest. Asa was his childhood best friend. They'd built fence lines together, rode rodeos, drank bourbon in the barn after heartbreaks. And then, Asa disappeared. Boone hadn't thought about Asa in over 2 decades. The man had vanished one summer, no goodbye, no explanation. Just gone. Boone had assumed it was over a woman, or maybe debts. But now, holding that strange piece of metal, he wondered if it had been something more. Something darker. Boone felt a chill creep up his spine as the thought hit him. What if this piece, this object, was part of whatever made Asa disappear? A loud knock on the screen door jolted him out of his spiral. Boone stood up, heart pounding. No one visited this late. He opened the door slowly and found Clyde Riggins, his neighbor, holding a flask and looking nervous. "Boone," Clyde said, voice low, "I heard what happened at the auction. That thing in the horse. It ain't the first time I've seen something like it." Boone stepped aside and let Clyde in, the air between them thick with something unspoken. As Clyde sat across from him, Boone felt the weight of the past press in harder than ever. The metal wasn't just a mystery. It was a thread, pulling at something Boone had buried deep for years. And it was beginning to unravel. Clyde Riggins took a slow sip from his flask, the whiskey hitting him harder than usual. His hands trembled slightly as he set it down on Boone's kitchen table. Boone leaned forward, the box still sitting between them like a loaded gun. "What do you mean you've seen something like it?" Boone asked, voice low and tight. He didn't like games, especially not ones that played with the past. Clyde rubbed the back of his neck and looked toward the window, where the night pressed in like a silent witness. "Back in '98, he said finally. "Out near the old Collier place. A bull turned up dead, no wounds, no struggle. But when they opened it up, there was something inside it. Metal. Just like that." He nodded at the object in Boone's box. "They said it was from a piece of farm equipment. That's what the vet told them. But that ain't what it looked like to me." Boone's mind was racing. He wanted to dismiss it, call it superstition or bad memory. But Clyde wasn't a man prone to fantasy. He'd been a straight shooter his whole life. If he said he saw something, he saw it. "You never told anyone?" Boone asked. Clyde shook his head. "No one wanted to hear it. And honestly, I didn't want to remember it. Felt wrong. Like something I wasn't supposed to understand." They both sat in silence for a long moment, the air between them thick with old dust and buried truth. Boone reached out and lifted the metal object again, turning it in the light. "You think this has something to do with Asa?" he asked quietly. Clyde's eyes narrowed. "I was hoping you wouldn't say that name," he muttered. "Because if this is about Asa, then we're stirring up something best left alone." Boone stood, pushing his chair back slowly. "I've lived with ghosts long enough, Clyde. If this thing is part of why he disappeared, I need to know." His voice cracked slightly, more emotion than he'd shown in years. Delilah, Jolene, Iron Smoke, every loss seemed to circle back to that one summer, that one friendship broken without warning. And now this damn piece of metal was pulling it all back to the surface. As Boone walked toward the barn to check on Iron Smoke, Clyde called after him. "You ever tell Jolene what really happened that summer?" Boone stopped in his tracks. He didn't turn around. He just stood there, the question echoing in his mind like a bullet. What really happened that summer? The truth was, he wasn't sure he even remembered anymore. Boone stood alone in the barn, his calloused hand resting gently on Iron Smoke's mane. The horse's breathing was steady, the swelling around his leg visibly reduced since the tumor had ruptured. But Boone wasn't at ease. His mind was stuck on Clyde's question. Had he ever told Jolene what really happened that summer? The truth was more complicated than a simple yes or no. That summer wasn't just when Asa vanished. It was when everything started to fall apart. In 1997, Asa Rawlins had worked Boone's ranch during one of the worst droughts in Texas history. The two had been close since boyhood, but that summer changed them. Tensions ran high. Crops failed. Money dried up. And Delilah and Asa had begun spending more time talking, laughing in ways Boone hadn't heard from her in years. He never accused them outright, but the suspicion dug its way into his chest like a splinter he couldn't reach. Boone remembered the last day he saw Asa. They'd fought, words spoken in anger, accusations thrown like knives. Asa had stormed off toward the far pasture where the fence line met the woods. He was supposed to fix a break in the wire. He never came back. They searched for 2 days. No tracks. No body. Just his gloves lying near the creek bed. Sheriff chalked it up to a runaway, maybe even suicide. But Boone always wondered, had he pushed Asa too far? The barn door creaked open. Boone turned, startled, to see Jolene standing in the dusty light. Her face was tighter, older than he remembered, but her eyes still held that same stormy defiance. "Got your message," she said flatly. "You said something happened to Iron Smoke." Boone nodded slowly. "There's more to it, Joe. I found something inside him. Something I can't explain." She stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "You dragged me back to this place because of a sick horse and a hunch?" Boone met her stare. "No. I dragged you back because I think whatever's been buried all these years is finally coming loose. And I need you to hear the truth." Jolene didn't answer. Her silence was louder than any word she could have spoken. Boone knew this wasn't just about Asa anymore. This was about her. About the years he failed her. He reached for the wooden box and handed it to her. This is what was inside him. She unwrapped the metal slowly, examining it with a strange mix of confusion and fear. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Dad, where did this come from?" Boone looked away, jaw tight. I think it came from the day Asa disappeared. And I think it's only the beginning." Jolene sat at the edge of the porch, the metal object cradled in her hands like something sacred and cursed at the same time. The breeze swept across the dry fields, carrying with it the distant groan of cattle and the creak of the old windmill. Boone watched her from the doorway, unsure if he should speak. So much had been left unsaid for too long. And now, the years of silence had become something sharp between them. She finally broke the stillness. "I remember that summer," she said quietly. "You and Mom were fighting. More than usual. I thought it was about money. But now I'm not so sure." Boone stepped out slowly, lowering himself into the chair beside her. His joints ached, not just from age but from regret. "It was about Asa," he said. "About what I thought was happening between him and your mother. I never saw anything, but I felt it, and I let that feeling turn into poison." Jolene looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You think Mom was in love with him?" Boone didn't answer right away. "I think she missed being seen. And Asa, he had a way of looking at people like they mattered." He paused, then added, "I don't know if anything happened. But I pushed him away. I said things that broke something between all of us. And then he was gone." His voice cracked, the weight of that memory still raw. She stared at the metal object in her hands. "So what does this have to do with iron smoke? With Asa?" Boone shook his head. "I don't know yet. But Clyde saw something like this before. In another animal. Same size, same shape. And now this shows up inside the one thing left on this ranch that meant anything to me. Feels like someone, or something, wants me to remember what I tried to forget." Jolene stood up suddenly, restless. "You didn't just lose Asa that summer. You lost me too. You pulled away from all of us. After Mom died, I kept hoping you'd come back to being you. But you were gone." Her voice trembled, and Boone looked down at his hands, ashamed. "I thought I was protecting what was left. But I was just hiding." As she turned to go back inside, Jolene paused in the doorway. "If we're going to find out what happened, it starts with the land. That pasture where he disappeared, it's still there, isn't it?" Boone nodded slowly. The summer field where Asa vanished had been untouched for over 25 years. And now, it was calling them back. She stared at the metal object in her hands. "So what does this have to do with iron smoke? With Asa?" Boone shook his head. "I don't know yet. But Clyde saw something like this before. In another animal. Same size, same shape. And now this shows up inside the one thing left on this ranch that meant anything to me. Feels like someone, or something, wants me to remember what I tried to forget." Jolene stood up suddenly, restless. "You didn't just lose Asa that summer. You lost me too. You pulled away from all of us. After Mom died, I kept hoping you'd come back to being you. But you were gone." Her voice trembled, and Boone looked down at his hands, ashamed. "I thought I was protecting what was left. But I was just hiding." As she turned to go back inside, Jolene paused in the doorway. "If we're going to find out what happened, it starts with the land. That pasture where he disappeared, it's still there, isn't it?" Boone nodded slowly. The summer field where Asa vanished had been untouched for over 25 years. And now, it was calling them back. The sun was just beginning to rise when Boone and Jolene reached the old pasture. The grass was high, brittle, and yellowed with time. It hadn't been touched in decades, not since the summer Asa Rawlins vanished without a trace. The wooden fence was falling apart, half swallowed by vines, and the gate creaked like it resented being opened after so many silent years. Boone hesitated before stepping through. his boots sinking slightly into the soil as if the land itself remembered everything he tried to forget. Jolene followed behind, holding a small flashlight and the box with the metal object inside. Her expression was sharp, focused. She hadn't said much on the drive over. Boone understood. Some ghosts speak louder in silence. As they walked deeper into the field, the familiar landmarks returned in flashes. The old cottonwood tree split by lightning, the rusted trough half buried in dirt, the bend in the creek where Boone had found Asa's gloves all those years ago. "This is where he said he'd be fixing the fence," Boone murmured, stopping near the edge of the woods. He pointed to a rotted post leaning like a drunk man. "He never came back from this spot." Jolene looked around carefully. "You sure no one ever searched the woods?" Boone nodded. "They did. With dogs, even. Nothing. It was like he vanished into thin air." But now, standing here again, Boone could feel something in the air. A pressure. A presence. The kind that makes your skin remember pain. Jolene stepped forward and knelt beside the broken fence. Something had caught her eye. Metal, peeking out from the dirt. She dug carefully and pulled out what looked like another piece of the same strange alloy as the one inside Iron Smoke. Smaller, rusted, but unmistakably similar. "Dad," she said, holding it up. "What is this stuff?" Boone took it with shaky hands. "I don't know," he said softly. "But I think we're standing on more than just memory." Just then, a gust of wind swept through the pasture, bending the tall grass in a single eerie wave. Jolene turned quickly, flashlight flickering as if reacting to something unseen. "Did you hear that?" she asked. Boone listened. It was faint, but there. A metallic clink, like iron tapping against stone, coming from beneath their feet. Boone knelt and pressed his palm to the ground. It was warmer than it should have been. Beneath the layers of earth and guilt, something was waiting. "We need to dig," he said, almost whispering. Jolene stared at him. "Dig for what?" Boone didn't answer. But deep down, he already knew, whatever had been buried that summer hadn't stayed buried. The sun was high overhead by the time Boone and Jolene had cleared the first few feet of soil. The ground fought them, thick with old roots and clay hardened by years of neglect. Each strike of the shovel echoed like a heartbeat. Boone's hands, though strong from decades of ranch work, began to cramp. Jolene's jeans were covered in dirt, sweat clinging to her back. But neither of them stopped. Something in the air, an instinct or a warning, told them they were close. At about 3 feet down, Boone's shovel struck something solid. Not rock, not wood, metal. A dull, hollow sound that vibrated through the handle. He dropped to his knees and brushed the dirt away with his hands, revealing a rusty, rectangular object, like a case or a box, about the size of a toolbox. "Help me," he said hoarsely, and Jolene joined him, scraping away until the entire object was visible. It was sealed shut, but there were markings along the edges, etched lines, strange symbols that made Boone's skin crawl. They lifted it out together, carefully, and placed it on the ground. Jolene examined the symbols. "I've never seen anything like this," she whispered. Boone nodded slowly. "Neither have I. And I don't think it belongs here. Not on this land. Not in this world." The words felt ridiculous as they left his mouth, but the metal wasn't just cold, it felt unnatural, like it had waited to be found. Using a crowbar from the truck, Boone wedged open the box. It creaked, resisted, then popped. Inside were several more metallic fragments, each shaped and cut with impossible precision. But beneath them was something worse. A small, cracked leather journal. Boone reached in and pulled it out, the cover nearly disintegrating in his hands. The initials AR were burned into the front. Jolene gasped. Asa Rawlins. Boone opened it carefully. The pages were stiff, yellowed, but legible. The entries were brief. Lists, diagrams, fragments of thoughts. And one page written just days before Asa disappeared, read, "They're watching the animals. It's not the land that's cursed, it's what came down on it." Boone looked up, his heart thudding. He knew something. Something happened here that summer, and we were too blind to see it. Jolene took a step back, her voice shaking. "Dad, this wasn't just about jealousy or a broken friendship, was it?" Boone didn't answer. His hands trembled around the journal, as if the truth Asa had buried was still alive, still pulsing beneath their feet. And just then, behind them, the tall grass shifted again. But there was no wind. Boone spun around, eyes locked on the tall grass that had just shifted behind them. His breath caught in his throat. Jolene stood frozen beside him, clutching the journal tight against her chest. "Did you see that?" she whispered. Boone nodded slowly. "There's nobody else out here. Not supposed to be." The grass stilled again, but the silence felt charged, electric. The kind of quiet that settles right before a storm breaks. Boone felt it in his bones. The land wasn't just remembering. It was reacting. He reached into the hole where the metal box had been, pushing aside more earth. His fingers struck something else, long, smooth, and wrapped in faded cloth. He pulled it out slowly. A rifle. Old. Rusted. But it wasn't one of Boone's. This weapon was unfamiliar, with foreign engravings down the barrel, symbols that matched those etched on the box. Jolene stared at it. "That's not standard issue," she muttered. "That doesn't even look like something from here." Before either of them could speak, Iron Smoke, tied to the fence nearby, let out a shrill, unnatural cry. The kind Boone had never heard from him before. The horse's ears flattened, hooves scraping the dirt as if trying to break free. Jolene dropped the journal and ran to him, calming his flank. Boone turned back toward the trees. Something was out there. Not just an animal, not a coyote. Something watching them. Then came a sound, low, metallic, and rhythmic, like machinery turning over far beneath the soil. The ground trembled slightly under their feet. Boone looked down at the pieces in the box, his voice low and cracking. "What if this, whatever this is, never left? What if it's been under us all along?" Jolene met his eyes. "Then it's waking up. And maybe Iron Smoke carried part of it because Asa didn't finish what he started." Boone felt the weight of it all settle on his shoulders, the decades of silence, the choices he made, the warnings he ignored. And now, whatever they had unearthed, wanted to be remembered. Behind them, the wind began to howl, not across the field, but up from the ground. The wind howled from the ground as if the earth itself was crying out. Boone stood still, heart pounding, staring down at the pieces of metal and the worn journal. Jolene held Iron Smoke tightly, her hands trembling against the horse's heaving sides. The air was thick with a pressure that couldn't be explained by science or weather. It was something older, something buried beneath years of silence, guilt, and fear. And then everything stopped. The trembling faded. The wind stilled. Boone felt his legs weaken as silence returned like a heavy blanket. Jolene walked back to him slowly, her eyes scanning the field. "Whatever that was, it passed," she said. But Boone wasn't so sure. He looked down at the pieces Asa had left behind, at the weapon that didn't belong in this world, and then to the journal, still open to the final page. One last sentence had been scribbled there, in shaky handwriting. "If I disappear, tell Boone it wasn't his fault." Boone's breath hitched. For over 25 years, he had carried the guilt of Asa's disappearance like a wound that never healed. But here it was, proof that Asa had known what he was walking into. He wasn't running from Boone, or from jealousy, or from love. He was running towards something he couldn't explain, trying to protect the people he loved from whatever lay beneath their feet. "I wasted so many years," Boone said, his voice breaking. I let my pride, my fear, tear us all apart. I thought I was being strong, but I was just running. Jolene put her hand on his shoulder, firm and forgiving. You're here now. That's what matters. Boone looked into her eyes and saw his wife again, Delilah's fire, her heart, her stubborn loyalty. And for the first time in decades, Boone let himself cry. As they packed up the metal fragments, the rifle, and Asa's journal, Boone glanced back toward the edge of the field. He could almost see him, Asa, standing there in the sun, grinning like he used to, boots in the dirt, hand on his hip. Not a ghost. Not a threat. Just a man who tried to do the right thing in a world that didn't understand. They buried the metal and sealed the earth. Not to hide the truth, but to give it rest. Back at the barn, Iron Smoke stood tall, calm, healed in ways no vet could explain. As Boone fed him gently, Jolene leaned against the gate. "We came looking for answers," she said softly. "And found peace instead." Boone nodded, brushing his hand over the horse's mane. "Some truths don't need to be solved," he murmured. "They just need to be forgiven."